Let's think about the word quart or the prefix quart. Well, I know a quarter has quart, and there's how many quarters to make a dollar? 4 quarters. Okay, well, then a quart, there's 4 quarts to make a gallon. So now let's talk about a quartile. A quartile, you see that quart in there, and that means 4. So what a quartile is we're going to divide data into 4 different sections. Therefore, each section will be worth 25%. And we're going to use this to make what we call a box plot. Okay, a box plot is taking data and putting it into 4 different sections. And it looks something like this right here. So let's go ahead and talk about that. So a box plot, each section has a quartile and represents 25% of the data. So we're going to go ahead and look at this data right here, and we're going to talk about how to make into 4 quartiles. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to find our median to split it into 2 parts. So I'm going to kind of look at this, and that would be cross one out, cross one out. I'm going to keep doing that. And I notice that I'm going to end up with 2 middle numbers. What that means is that my median is right here. So how do I figure that out? I'm going to add and divide by 2. So 4 plus 6 is 10, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So my median is 5. Now that's important to know. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this half of the data into 2 parts and this half into 2 parts. So let's start with this first half. Okay, I'm going to look at this first half, and I'll cross one out, 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 cross one out. And I've got a middle number right there, 3. That's dividing it into fourths right there. Let's look at the other side. I'm going to cross one out, 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 cross one out. And here's that one. So let me talk about how this is working. What this means, that this right here is 25% of the data. This is 25% of the data. This is 25% of the data. And this is 25% of the data. So knowing that, we're going to talk about a box plot displays data based on a 5-number summary. You have a minimum, quartile 1, median, quartile 3, and maximum. Now I know you're going, well, why do you have a quartile 1 and a quartile 3? Your median is essentially your quartile 2. And quartile 1 is the median of the first half of data. In this set that we have right here, that's going to be this 3. So that's your quartile 1. Your median is your median, which was 5. Your quartile 3 is the median of the second half of the data. So that's your quartile 3. Your minimum is your smallest number and your maximum is your biggest number. So in this case, it would be 2 is your minimum and 10 is your maximum. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this data to go ahead and make a box plot. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with quartile 1, the median, and quartile 3. So quartile 1 in our data was 3. So I'm going to make a line at 3. Now I'm going to make a line at my median, which is at 5. Now I need to make a line at quartile 3, which was 8. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect those lines to make a box. So now I'm going to use my minimum and maximum, and I'm going to start with my minimum, which was 2. So I'm going to put a dot above the 2 right here, and my maximum was 10. So I'm going to put a dot right here. And I'm going to go ahead and connect the dot to the box. I now have my box plot. Now one thing that's important to remember is that each part is 25% of the data. This is a fourth of the data. I know it doesn't look the same size, but it's a fourth of the data because it's the same amount of pieces of data right here. And this is a fourth of the data, just like that's right here. That's 3 pieces of data. Then right here, this is 3 pieces of data. This represents 3 pieces of data. This is 3 pieces of data. This represents 3 pieces of data. So let's talk about what each thing is called real quick. So this right here is my minimum, like we said. Quartile 1 is this right here, which is halfway between it's the median of the first half of the data. Here's my median that separates it. So that means this is 50% of the data and this is 50% of the data. Here's quartile 3 and here's my maximum. We also have something called the interquartile range. That's the difference between quartile 3 and quartile 1, which we can abbreviate with Q3, Q1. So in this case, my interquartile range would be quartile 3 minus quartile 1. Well, quartile 3 was 8 and quartile 1 was 3. So that's going to be 5. So my IQR, which is interquartile range, is 5. So just really quickly want to talk about this. Now, sometimes they're called box and whisker plots, mainly because they call these the whiskers. And again, it has got your minimum, your quartile 1, which is lower quartile, upper quartile, quartile 3, your median, and your maximum. Your interquartile range is quartile 3 minus quartile 1. What's important to again understand is that even if it doesn't look all the same size, that each part of this is 25% of the data. That's why it's a quartile. Okay, it's 25% or 1/4 of the data. One thing I want you to also know is that when you're doing this, you can only find the median and then a range and an interquartile range. You cannot find the mean or the mode unless you actually have the data before you made it. But if you're just looking at one, you cannot find the mean and the mode. Now we're going to make one out of these test grades. Now, first of all, I'm looking and it's already in order from least to greatest, so I don't have to put it in order yet, but I'm going to start by finding the median. So I'm going to cross one out, cross one out, cross one out, cross one out, and so forth. And I notice that I've got my median right there. So I would figure out what that would be, and that's going to be 90.5. So my median is going to be 90.5. That's my median. Now I need to go ahead and look at the other two sections of the data. So this right here, this 45 to 90 is a half of the data, and 91 to 100 is half of the data. So how many are on each side? Right now there's 6 scores on both sides. So right now this is 50% of the data, and this is 50% of the data. So now I'm going to find quartile 1, which is the median of the first half of the data. So I'll cross one out, 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 and I have it right here. So if I add them and divide by 2, I'm going to get 65. So 65 is my quartile 1. Now I'm going to do the same thing for quartile 3. So I'm going to look for the median of my second half of the data. So I'll cross one out, 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 cross one out. So it's right here in between 94 and 100. So I would add them and divide by 2. And when I add them up, I get 194. And when I divide by 2, I get 97. So that is quartile 3. So now I'm going to go ahead and make my box plot. I'm going to go ahead and make my line at quartile 1, which is 65. And I'm going to go ahead and make my line at the median, which is 90.5 or 90 and a half. So it's going to be a little bit past 90. And then my quartile 3 is 97. So that'll be right there. And I'm going to go ahead and connect them to make a box. Now I'm going to go ahead and put a dot at the minimum, which is 45. And at the maximum, which is 100. And then I'll go ahead and connect those to the box. And now I can see that I have my minimum, my quartile 1, my median, quartile 3, and maximum. Now it looks really funny because it's hard to understand that each section is 25% of the data. Notice that from here, the median to the maximum, look how small that is. That means half of the students that took this test got above 90, okay, over half of them. So is it this 25%, this little part, is that really 25% of the data? It is. It doesn't look like it, but it is. And here's why. How many test grades were right here from my minimum to quartile 1? 3 test grades. So there's 3 test grades right there. So how many test grades were in between quartile 1 and the median? 3 test grades. So this is 3 test grades right there. What about from the median to quartile 3? How many test grades do you have? 3 test grades. And what about from my quartile 3 to my maximum? 3 test grades. So each section is still 3 test grades. So why does it look so funny? It looks so funny because right here I have this outlier. It's way below the rest, and that's going to skew the data. And we would actually say that this is skewed left because it's got this big gap of grades in the left. It's all clustered to the right, so we would call that skewed left, and we'll talk more about that later. But again, this is 25% of the data, 25% of the data, 25%, and 25%. So just to recap, your box plot is made up of a 5-point summary. A minimum, a maximum, your median, quartile 1, quartile 3. And then the other big concept that we've learned today is that you can also find your interquartile range, or IQR. And I would do that by subtracting Q3 minus Q1, which is quartile 3 minus quartile 1. Quartile 3 was 97, and quartile 1 was 65. And if I subtract them, I'm going to get 32. So my interquartile range is 32. Could I find my range? Well, yes, I could. My range would be the maximum minus the minimum, which would be 100 minus 45, which would be 55. I hope this has given you a good introduction to box plots.